It's time for another Bible study. So glad that you are back with us for another day here as we work through the book of Mark. And we are getting so close to the end. Today we wrap up chapter 13, which means that there are only 4 more chapters left, 14, 15, and 16. Easter is on its way. We are well now within the Passion Week. The triumphal entry has already happened. Jesus is going through his last teachings just before the Last Supper, and we are going to see it through Mark's lens. Now, Mark's lens is not the normal lens that we see these events through. Usually, preachers like me will go to the book of Luke or to the book of Mark in order to talk about the death, burial, and resurrection of Jesus, or they'll go to the book of John if they're looking at the time period before the Last Supper, the Garden of Gethsemane, those things. And so the book of Mark is generally not the first place that we go to read these things. And so we're going to see how Mark tells the story, knowing that Mark was actually the first person to tell and write the story. And so it will be very interesting to see where Mark goes from here. Now, I also want to remind you, these are going in the mail in the next day or two. And so this is not necessarily your last chance, but it may well be your last chance to get one of these Whole 50 Bible study guides before the Bible study actually begins a week from Sunday. And so Easter, April 4th, is the day when the Whole 50 Bible study begins. And I have been looking forward to this for a while and would love to invite you to be a part of it. Super easy for you to get one of these Bible study books. You can go to christtable.today, that little right there, URL, christtable.today. And everybody who makes a donation to Christ Table is going to get one of these in the mail to you. In fact, I start packaging them up today. And so looking forward to putting these out in the mail to you over the next couple of days and walking through 50 days of spiritual growth from all across Scripture. Now, if you want to find out more about what we're doing here at Christ Table, then go ahead and go to that website, sign up for the email contact list. And in fact, over the next day or two, I'm going to send all of the information out about Easter. If you're here in South Florida, we're going to be in person on Easter Sunday morning. And so looking forward to invite you to be a part of that, but we also will be live online as well on Easter, and it's going to be a great day, and it's been a great Lent, and we're thankful to have you along for the journey in whatever way you participate with us. So why don't we go ahead and jump into today's reading? We are in Mark chapter 13, 21 through 37, and I've kind of carved out a little bit in the middle of today's reading because this is, again, is a continuation of yesterday's reading. And so it is, it's deep. It is apocalyptic literature, which means that the things that Jesus is saying here are very difficult for us to understand and interpret what he means. And if we feel like it's difficult for us to understand and interpret what he means, imagine being the disciples who were hearing this for the first time as you're reading through the passage today. When we look at apocalyptic literature, though, it's very it's very enticing maybe for us to look at it and try to translate and understand all of the images, all the metaphors, and all the meanings. And we have to be careful doing that because we just don't have enough information to fully understand exactly what's going on here. You can drive yourself nuts by trying to figure out what Jesus means or John means in Revelation or the other places where there are apocalyptic literature, or even worse, you could make incorrect assumptions or incorrect determinations as far as outcomes of these things. And so what we want to do is we want to come at these passages a little open-handed. We want to invite the Holy Spirit to guide us through it. We want to try and understand what's being said here, but maybe more so than trying to interpret specifically what the meaning of passages like this are. Maybe it's better for us to try to understand what the mood is, what the feeling is, what is trying to be communicated in general rather than in specific. And if we feel like we can come to some determinations or understandings, that's okay. But we just want to, as I said, hold to those things loosely. So Jesus is continuing on in this discussion about, it seems both end times as well as times that are soon to come in the life of the apostles. They did not necessarily see those things as being two separate things. They thought that the end times were going to come in their lifetime. Well, now in retrospect, we know that that wasn't the case, that didn't happen that way. And so now when we look at Jesus' words, we see them through the lens of both now and not yet. Whenever Jesus is speaking here in Mark chapter 13, we kind of interpreted it as part of what Jesus is saying here has a short-term fulfillment, and part of what Jesus is saying here has a long-term fulfillment. And it's kind of difficult for us in some of these places to know which is which on these things. Scholars over the years have said that it's both now and not yet. So why don't we jump in to verse 28, which is a part of our reading today. Now, learn a lesson from the fig tree. When its branches bud and its leaves begin to sprout, you know that summer is near. In the same way, when you see all of these things taking place, you can know that his return is very near, right at the door. And so Jesus is talking about, when will the Son of Man return? When will he return? When will the Messiah return? And so he's referencing back to the previous 27 verses that he has given already. But he's also referencing here in verse 28, the fig tree. Learn the lesson from the fig tree. Now, we have kind of skipped over in our Bible studies some of the discussion about the fig tree. But if you've been reading, you've noticed that Jesus and his disciples noticed a fig tree. And then a few hours later, a day or two later, when they passed by the fig tree again, they noticed it again. And that it, I believe if I'm remembering correctly, it was kind of dead. It wasn't bearing any fruit. Jesus curses it and then it dies, I guess, is the way that the story rolls itself out. But this fig tree is kind of an ongoing theme here at Mark unto this point. And so Jesus is now referencing back to those times when we have spoken and when they have spoken about the fig tree before. And he says essentially, learn a lesson from it. When its branches bud and its leaves begin to sprout, you know that summer is near. And so the nation of Israel, kind of the fig tree had been a metaphor, or maybe a symbol is a better word, for the nation of Israel. Now, I just kind of want to put up a picture of a fig tree in Israel here. I mean, and what we see here is, just kind of a standard tree. It would bud and it would bloom in spring. It was seen as kind of being a harbinger of summer. So whenever the fig tree blooms and gives fruit, it was a sign that summer was not just near, but summer was now on the doorstep. Summer had arrived. And so whenever Jesus curses the fig tree, essentially he's saying it has failed in its primary duty, and that is to give fruit and to be a harbinger, or to be a sign that a new age or new season has arrived, summer. So it's failed miserably in its primary mission, in its one job. And Jesus says that just like the fig tree, Israel has also failed in its one job, and that is to notice the Messiah, to notice that a new season is at hand, a new kingdom, that God is doing a new work. And so the fig tree here is an example of something that is so full of promise, but which failed to deliver. Now, for some of us, we love figs. Fig Newtons, haven't been to Israel, having eaten figs from Israel, unbelievable. Others of us, fig is like maybe coconut, or we'd rather try our hand at cyanide than we would with fig. But what we can say about it is that a fig tree holds promise each and every year, just as any fruit tree does. An orange tree here in Florida, a peach tree, in Alabama or Georgia, an apple tree in the Midwest, holds the promise of bearing fruit each and every year. This fig tree holds the same kind of promise, and it failed to deliver. And so Jesus is saying that Israel has kind of been the same thing. Judaism has done the same thing. It held a lot of promise, but it failed to deliver. Don't be that way, he says to his followers. I tell you the truth, he continues, this generation will not pass away and will not pass from the scene before all of these things take place. Heaven and earth will disappear, but my words will never disappear. Now, when I first read this, I thought that's tough. This generation will not pass away, because what he's saying here is essentially that those people who are literally hearing his words in that moment, the disciples, the followers, won't die before all of the end times things that he's been speaking of occur. Now, we know that he spoke of some things that were in the immediate that would happen. I mean, that would happen in their lifetimes, the fall of the temple, the wars and rumors of wars. But some of the things that Jesus has now spoken of in these last now 29 verses clearly didn't happen in the disciples' lifetimes. And so was Jesus wrong here? And so that word generation, at first I was like, okay, let's look that up. And so look up the word generation. The word generation there doesn't necessarily mean like Generation X or boomers or the millennials, Generation Y or Gen Z. It doesn't necessarily mean just a generation of individuals. It can also mean a nation. A nation will not pass away. But we know that in a way, Israel did pass away for a long time. Maybe in a manner of speaking, they didn't, but it can also mean an era or a season. That definition seems to make a lot more sense after having just talked about the fig tree and seasons, that it blooms in spring. It's a harbinger or a sign that summer is on its way. And so I think that that word rendering seems to make more sense than the word generation here, is that this season or this era will not pass from the scene before all of these things take place. And so that seems to make more sense in the context of what's going on here. So if you have the New Living Translation, or if you're a translator of the New Living Translation, I'd say you might have could have done a little bit better job on that word right there. But no matter what happens when heaven and earth disappear, my words will never disappear. And so I think, the takeaway here is that we as Christ followers, no matter what happens on earth, no matter what happens in heaven, we must be content in the knowledge, Jesus says in verse 31, that although everything may appear to be in flux, the words of Jesus will remain. And this is what he's saying to his disciples there, them not knowing what's about to happen with the trial, the betrayal, the crucifixion. Everything in their life is going to very soon appear to be in great flux. But Jesus' words, my words, he says, will remain. Remember the things that I have told you. And this is something that holds true, not just for his disciples, but for all time. If his words remain, that his words are as true when they were given and are as true to the original hearers as they are to us today. They still remain true yet today, no matter what appears to be in flux 2,000 years later. The words of Jesus will remain, and that should provide us contentment during those moments in our own life that seem apocalyptic, that seem where the world is coming to an end. Be content in the knowledge that no matter how things look or seem on the surface, that Jesus' words will remain, that his promises are still in effect for you and are still as powerful, are still as meaningful, and are still as true today as they were then. However, Jesus says, and with this we'll close today, no one knows the day or the hour when any of these things will happen. And we know that's true. The disciples predicted that they that they would see the return of the Messiah. And that didn't happen. And I think every generation since then has felt that they will see the return of the Messiah. I was having this discussion with my kids the other day. The school that they go to, one of their teachers was saying that everything that needs to happen has happened, and that they believe that there is no way that Jesus isn't going to come back in their lifetime. And I kind of chuckled to myself and said, I don't know. Could he? Yes. Can he? Yes. But literally everybody has thought that. And those who have tried to predict it have been wrong. And many people have predicted it and then changed the date and predicted it again. And just don't even try. No one knows when it's going to happen. It may happen in your lifetime. Odds are it probably won't, no matter how bad things look. It's just the way that it is. Not even the angels in heaven or Jesus himself knows when he's going to return. Only the Father knows. For some people, that may provide some discomfort, but I think it should provide comfort that God knows, that God's in control. It's not something that we're supposed to worry about. And since you don't know, verse 33 says, Jesus tells us, and since you don't know when that time will come, just be on guard. Just stay alert. It gives this great story example of being on guard and being on alert. And that's what our job is. That's what our mission is to simply always be ready. Could it be tomorrow? Yeah. Could it be today? Yeah. Could it be another 2,000 years? Yeah. Just be ready. Be alert. Be watchful. Jesus is telling his followers, both then and today, to be vigilant, to stay awake, to be watchful and ready. There's so many great parallels and metaphors in today's world. Jobs where you have to be alert, you have to be watchful, you have to be ready. And if you're not, you'll fail. You're no good. The spiritual life is the same way. And the stakes there are much, much higher than any of the other places where we must, in our roles in life, be awake and watchful and ready. And Jesus says, be vigilant. Don't ever be found asleep at the wheel or uncaring or thinking that you have more time. May you have more time, but Jesus says, I don't want my followers to live that way. I want them to always be ready, like the Minutemen. Always be ready at a moment's notice for whatever the call or the need may be. May that not just describe Christ's disciples 2,000 years ago, but may that also describe you as you follow him today. May you find yourself ready always. A great way to be ready. See what I did there? ChristTable.today. It's been great to be with you today for Bible study. Very much looking forward to being back with you tomorrow as we continue on in the book of Mark. But until that time,